Hello, so this Science of Sport video is part of a series of videos looking at BTEC, Sport and Exercise Sciences, Unit 2, Functional Anatomy. In particular, we're looking at the Learning Aim E, which is all about the muscular system. And this is the second video relating to E1 muscle types. So this video is actually focusing on the anatomy of skeletal muscle. So the exam board specification gives you 4 things here which you might need to be able to describe or to identify on a diagram. So I'm going to firstly play you a short video that gives you a visual representation of the anatomy of a skeletal muscle fibre and a skeletal muscle, and then I'll pick out some of the key points relating to the specification.
So this is their bicep. I think we've all seen diagrams of what muscles look, at least on kind of a macro level. And it's connected to bones at either end. So let me draw the bones. I'm not going to detail where. So it's connected to the bones at either end by tendons. So this right here. So right here would be some bone. Right there would be another bone that it's connected to. And then this is tendons, which connects the bones to the muscles. So this right here is tendon. And we have the general sense connected to 2 bones. When it contracts, it moves some part of our skeletal system. So we're actually focused on skeletal muscles. Skeletal. The other types are smooth muscles and cardiac muscles. Cardiac muscles are those, as you can imagine, in our heart. And smooth muscles these are more involuntary, slow-moving muscles in things like our digestive tract. And I'll do a video on that in the future. But most of the time when people say muscles, we associate them with skeletal muscles that move our skeletal system around, allow us to run and lift and talk and do and bite things. So this is what we normally associate. Let's dig in a little bit deeper here. So if I were to take a cross section of this bicep right there, if I were to take a cross section of that muscle right there, so let me do it big. So if this is the cross section, so the bicep or that muscle, I'll stop saying biceps because I want to be general. So I'm going to take a cross section of it. So this is the cross section. This is where I've taken my cut. And then it'll look something like this. This is the inside of this muscle over here. Now, I said back here we had our tendon. Back here we had our tendon. And then there's actually a covering, and there's no strict demarcation or dividing line between the tendon and the covering around this muscle, but that covering is called the epimysium. Epimysium, and it's really just connective tissue that covers the muscle, kind of protects it. It reduces friction between the muscle and the surrounding bone and other tissue that might be in this person's arm right there. And then within this muscle, you have connective tissue on the inside. Let me do it in another color. I'll do it in orange. This orange tissue right here. And let me make this orange tissue, and then it divides off little, I guess we could call them fibers of some sort. So we have this orange tissue right there. This is called the perimysium. And that's also just connective tissue inside of the actual muscle. Perimysium. And then each of these things that the perimysium is dividing off. So each of these things at the perimysium, let's say if we were to take one of these things and allow it to go a little bit further. So if we were to take this thing right here, what this perimysium is dividing off, and if we were to pull it out, actually let me do this one right here. If we were to pull this one out, just like that, so you have the perimysium surrounding it, right? This is all perimysium, and it's just a fancy word for connective tissue. You have perimysium, and there's other stuff in there. You could have nerves, and you could have capillaries, all sorts of stuff, because you have to get blood and neuronal signals to your muscles eventually. So it's not just connective tissue. It's other things that have to be able to eventually get to your muscle cells. So each of these, I guess you call it subfibers, but these are pretty big subfibers of the muscle. This is called a fascicle. This is a fascicle right here. So that right there is a fascicle. That's a fascicle. And then the connective tissue inside of the fascicle is called the endomysium. Endomysium. So let me draw the endomysium right here. So once again, more connective tissues, has capillaries in it, has nerves in it, all of the things that have to eventually come in contact with muscles, with muscle cells. We're inside of a single muscle. So let me draw the endomysium. So all this green connective tissue is endomysium. Endomysium. And each of these things that are in the endomysium are an actual muscle cell. This is an actual muscle cell. So I'll do it in purple. So this thing right here, I can pull it out a little bit. Let me pull this thing out a little bit. Just like that. So if I pull this out, this is an actual muscle cell. This is what we wanted to get to, but we're going to go even within the muscle cell to understand how all the myosin and the actin filaments fit into that muscle cell. So this right here is a muscle cell, or a myofiber. Myofiber. The two prefixes you'll see a lot when dealing with muscles. You're going to see myo, which you could imagine refers to muscle. And you're also going to see the word sarco, like sarcolemma or sarcoplasmic reticulum. So you're also going to see the prefix sarco, and that's flesh. So, sarcophagus, or you could think of other things that start with sarco. So sarco is flesh, but, when muscle is flesh and myo is muscle. So this is myofiber. This is an actual muscle cell. And so let's zoom in on that actual muscle cell. So let me actually draw it really a lot bigger here. So an actual muscle cell, it's called a myofiber. It's called a fiber because it's longer than it is wide. And they come in various, so let me draw the myofiber like this. So this is my muscle cell right here. And I'll take a cross section of the muscle cell as well. So this is my myofiber. Myofiber. And these could be, relatively short, several hundred micrometers, or it could be quite long, or at least quite long by cellular standards. We're talking several centimeters. So several centimeters, if you think of it as a cell, that's quite a long cell. And because it's so long, it actually has to have multiple nucleuses. And actually, to draw the nucleuses, let me do a better job drawing the myofiber. I'm going to make little lumps in the outside membrane where the nucleuses can fit on this myofiber. Remember, this is just one of these individual muscle cells. And they're really long, so they have multiple nucleuses. And let me take its cross section because we're going to go inside of this muscle cell. So I said that it's multinucleated. So if we kind of imagined its membrane being transparent, then there'd be one nucleus over here, another nucleus over here, another nucleus over here, another nucleus over there. And the reason why it's multinucleated is so that over large distances, you don't have to wait for proteins to get all the way from this nucleus all the way over to this part of the muscle cell. You can actually have the DNA information close to where it needs to be. So it's multinucleated. I read one, I think it was 30 or so nucleuses per millimeter of muscle tissue is what the average is. I don't know if that's actually the case, but the nucleuses are kind of right under the membrane of the muscle cell. And you remember what that's called from the last video. The membrane of the muscle cell is the sarcolemma. Sarcolemma, or sarcolemma, however you want to call it. These are the nucleuses. And then if you go even within, if you take the cross section of that, there are even tubes within that. There are tubes within that called myofibrils. So here, there's a bunch of tubes inside of the actual cell. Let me pull one of them out. So I've pulled out one of these tubes. This is a myofibril. Myofibril. And if you were to look at this under a light microscope, you'll see it has little striations on it. You'll see it has little striations. So the striations would look something like that, like that, like that. And then there'll be little thin ones like that, like that. And this is inside of these myofibrils is where we'll find our myosin and actin filaments. So let's zoom.
So that video hopefully gave you a really good starting point for the breaking down the anatomy of a muscle itself down to the microscopic or molecular level. So this diagram then actually takes a segment of this whole muscle and looks at it, a little bit like the video did. So we've got, first of all, we would have a tendon attaching over the elbow joint, and that connective tissue would wrap around the outside of this whole muscle. So you can just about see it being a bit whiter there, perhaps. That would represent the connective tissue. And the outer connective tissue wrapping around the whole muscle is called the epimysium. Okay, so the outer layer is the epimysium. Then what you can see is if we look at this cross-sectional end of the muscle, we've got lots of bundles of muscle fibers. So first of all, another bit of terminology, the bundles of muscle fibers are called fasciculae or fascicles. Fasciculae or fascicles. So this is a fascicle. These are fasciculae. Okay, so a fascicle is a bundle of muscle fibers. Now, you can see in white on this diagram, or sort of pinky white on this diagram, the connective tissue wrapping around all of these fascicles is called the perimysium. So the connective tissue in the middle around the bundles is the perimysium. Then what we've done is the diagram pulls out one bundle of muscle fibers. Okay, so one fascicle. This is a fascicle. You can see when you look at the cross section of the fascicle, there are lots of individual fibers that make it up. And again, the connective tissue around these individual fibers is called the endomysium. So we've got epimysium, the outer covering. We've got perimysium, the bundle covering or fascicle covering. And we've got endomysium, the muscle fiber covering. So this basically is a single muscle fiber. And again, the video described a single muscle fiber as a myofiber. Remember, myo is muscle, okay? Myocardium, muscle wall of the heart, cardium, heart. So this is a single muscle fiber or a myofiber. Again, we're not going to go into loads of detail in this particular video, but if we do look at the end of the single muscle fiber, you can see again that there are lots of individual elements. These are called myofibrils, and they're made up of different kinds of protein. We will look much more closely at that in one of the following videos. So importantly for this part of the specification, you need to know the name of and what is the epimysium, the perimysium, the endomysium, and what is a fascicle. It's a bundle of fibers, and this is a single muscle fiber or a myofiber. What I suggest you do over the next perhaps 2 slides is pause the video and just have a closer look in your own time. So this is a similar diagram to the previous one, but just shows a slightly different perspective. So this shows the actual cross-sectional view, the whole muscle encased in the epimysium, the slightly pinky pericardium connective tissue. These are fascicles, these are bundles. Then each muscle fiber within that is wrapped by the endomysium. And you can see again that this blue and red blobs there represent blood vessels, because we know muscle fibers need a blood supply, need oxygen, need to remove waste products, therefore it needs blood. There are also nerves in there, of course. We know already that we voluntarily tell our muscles to contract, and to give that instruction we need nerves. So again, have a little look closely at this. This is a fascicle, a bundle. Each of these in here are individual muscle fibers or myofibers. Similarly, pause the video yourself and have a little look at this detail. So this is written detail of the things that have been explained to you through the video so far, but do take your time to read through that more closely. So I just wanted to put in a slightly more anatomical diagram. This is microscopic, so this isn't a drawn diagram. You can see the connective tissue around the outside of these fibers. You can see that there are different size fibers that are packed with more or less myofibrils, more or less proteins. But yeah, this is more the reality of a muscle fiber and muscle cells. So just finally then, to wrap it all up, again, as an overview, you should know that there are tendons typically at each end of muscles. This sort of thicker skeletal muscle part is a belly. We call it the belly of the muscle. The origin is the tendon where which is fixed. So often it's the proximal end, the end that's nearest the center of the body. And the insertion is the tendon that attaches to the moving end, so over a joint. And when this muscle contracts, it's that end that pulls and moves the joint in whichever way. So this connective tissue is what we've just been describing, the epimysium, the perimysium, and the endomysium. The video, of course, didn't particularly go much beyond a single muscle fiber. So this would be a single muscle fiber, and one of the following videos will do. But we did recognize that it's made up of smaller myofibrils, so even smaller units. If you've ever seen the inside of an electrical wire, you've got the outer casing, and if you chop it up, you've got bundles of wire, and if you chop them up, you've got smaller bundles of wire, and if you chop that up, you've got smaller bundles of wire. That's very much the structure of our muscle. And lastly, of course, pause the video and have a little read at this. We've mentioned already that muscles need blood vessels, they need an oxygen supply and removal of waste products option, and we need nerves to make the muscles contract.